Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles. What started as a mother's simple gesture to help a stranded soldier on a stormy night would soon transform into something beyond her wildest dreams. This is the true story of how one woman's compassion during her darkest hour opened doors she never knew existed, proving that when we help others without expecting anything in return, the universe has a way of helping us back in the most unexpected ways. Sarah Martinez never believed in fairy tales. As a single mother working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table, she had learned that life was about survival, not miracles. But on one rain-soaked evening in November, when she stopped to help a young soldier whose car had broken down, she had no idea she was about to step into a story that would restore her faith in humanity and change her family's destiny forever. What happened next would challenge everything she thought she knew about kindness, courage, and the incredible power of human connection. This is her story. Raw, real, and absolutely true. Sarah Martinez gripped the steering wheel tighter as another flash of lightning lit up the dark November sky. The rain hammered against her windshield so hard that even with the wipers on full speed, she could barely see the road ahead. She was already 20 minutes late picking up her 8-year-old son Miguel from after-school care, and she knew they would charge her an extra $15 for every minute past 6 o'clock, money she simply didn't have. Working as a waitress at Danny's Diner during the day and cleaning offices at night, Sarah had become an expert at stretching every dollar until it screamed. Her small apartment in a less expensive part of town was clean but sparse, with furniture she had bought second-hand and a refrigerator that made strange noises but somehow kept running. The walls were covered with Miguel's artwork and school certificates, colourful reminders of the one bright spot in her difficult life. Tonight had been particularly rough at the diner. A group of college students had left a huge mess and practically no tip, and her manager had complained about her request to leave early for Miguel. Sarah had explained about the aftercare situation, but Mr. Peterson just shrugged and reminded her that plenty of people would love to have her job. The words stung because they were true. In this small Texas town, good jobs were hard to come by, especially for someone like Sarah who had never finished college. As she navigated through the storm, Sarah's mind wandered to the pile of bills waiting on her kitchen table. The electricity bill was due tomorrow, and she was still short $43. She had already sold her grandmother's jewelry collection and picked up extra cleaning shifts, but it never seemed to be enough. Sometimes she lay awake at night wondering how her life had become such a struggle, especially when she worked so hard every single day. The divorce 2 years ago had left her completely on her own. Miguel's father had moved to California with his new girlfriend and rarely sent the child support payments he had promised. Sarah had tried calling him several times, but he had changed his phone number and seemed determined to forget that his son existed. The betrayal hurt deeply, not just for herself, but for Miguel, who still asked when Daddy was coming to visit. Through the rain, Sarah noticed a figure standing next to a broken-down car on the side of the highway. The person was soaking wet and appeared to be trying to flag down passing vehicles, but in this storm, most drivers were too focused on getting home safely to stop. Sarah's first instinct was to keep driving. She was already late, had very little money, and couldn't afford to get involved in someone else's problems. But as she got closer, she could see it was a young man in military uniform. Something about his posture, the way he stood, straight despite being drenched, reminded her of her own brother Carlos, who had served in Iraq. Carlos had always talked about how military families took care of each other, how they never left anyone behind. The memory of her brother, who had died in combat 3 years ago, made her heart ache with fresh grief. Sarah found herself slowing down and pulling over to the shoulder, her hazard lights blinking through the rain. She rolled down her passenger window and called out to the soldier. He jogged over, his boots splashing through the puddles, and she could see he was probably in his early 20s, with kind eyes and a respectful demeanor. "Ma'am, I'm really sorry to bother you," he said, raising his voice over the storm. "My car just died, and I'm trying to get back to base. I called for a tow, but they said it might be hours in this weather. I don't want to impose, but if you happen to be heading toward Fort Hood, I'd be incredibly grateful for a ride." Sarah hesitated for just a moment. Fort Hood was about 15 minutes out of her way, which meant she would be even later picking up Miguel, and the fees would be even higher. But looking at this young soldier, soaked to the bone and stranded in the storm, she thought about Carlos again. She thought about all the times her brother had relied on the kindness of strangers during his deployments, and how grateful their family had been for every person who had helped him along the way. "Get in," she said, unlocking the passenger door. "You're going to catch pneumonia standing out there." The soldier's face lit up with genuine relief and gratitude. "Thank you so much, Mom. I'm Private First Class David Washington, and I really can't tell you how much I appreciate this." He climbed into the car, careful not to drip too much water on her seats, though they were already old enough that a little rain couldn't hurt them. As Sarah pulled back onto the highway, she learned that David had been visiting his sick grandmother in a nearby town and was rushing back to base before his leave expired. He had saved up for months to buy the used car that had just broken down, and now he was worried about being late and getting in trouble with his commanding officer. He spoke with the kind of respect and politeness that reminded Sarah even more of Carlos, and she felt a familiar warmth in her chest at being able to help someone in uniform. "My brother was in the army," Sarah found herself saying as they drove through the storm. "He always said that military folks look out for each other." "Yes, ma'am, that's absolutely true," David replied. "What unit was your brother with, if you don't mind me asking?" Sarah's voice became quieter. "He was with the 101st Airborne. He was killed in Afghanistan 3 years ago." She had said those words so many times, but they still felt strange and heavy in her mouth. David was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was filled with genuine respect. "I'm so sorry for your loss, ma'am. Your brother made the ultimate sacrifice for our country. That means everything to people like me who are still serving." The sincerity in his voice made Sarah's eyes well up with tears, though she blinked them back quickly. She had learned to be strong, to keep moving forward no matter how much it hurt. But sometimes, when someone acknowledged Carlos's sacrifice with real understanding, it brought back all the emotions she usually kept buried. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the storm gradually beginning to ease as they got closer to the base. David was respectful and quiet, occasionally giving directions, but mostly just grateful to be out of the rain. Sarah found herself thinking about how different he seemed from some of the young people she served at the diner. There was something mature and grounded about him, a sense of responsibility that made him seem older than his years. When they finally reached the main gate at Fort Hood, David turned to Sarah with a look of deep appreciation. "Ma'am, I honestly don't know how to thank you. You saved me tonight, and I want you to know that I'll never forget your kindness." "It was nothing," Sarah replied, though they both knew it wasn't true. In today's world, stopping to help a stranger took courage, and giving up time and gas money when you had very little to spare was a genuine sacrifice. David reached into his wallet and pulled out a $20 bill. "Please, let me give you something for gas and for your time." Sarah shook her head firmly. "I didn't help you for money. I helped you because it was the right thing to do. You just get to your base safely and don't worry about anything else." The young soldier looked at her for a long moment, clearly moved by her refusal to take payment. "You're an amazing person," he said simply. "If there's ever anything I can do to pay you back, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." He handed her a small piece of paper with his contact information written in neat handwriting. "I mean that sincerely." Sarah took the paper, though she couldn't imagine ever needing to contact him. "Just be safe and serve our country well," she said. "That's payment enough for me." As David got out of the car and jogged toward the guard station, Sarah sat for a moment watching him go. There was something about the encounter that had touched her deeply, beyond just the memory of Carlos. Maybe it was the young man's genuine gratitude, or the way he had treated her with such respect and courtesy. In a world where she often felt invisible, working jobs where people barely noticed her, it had been refreshing to be seen and appreciated as a human being. The drive to Miguel's after-school program took another 20 minutes, and by the time she arrived, she was 35 minutes late. The fees would cost her $52 she didn't have, but seeing Miguel's relieved smile when she walked through the door made it worth every penny. He ran to her and wrapped his arms around her waist, and she realized that no matter how hard things got, moments like these made all the struggle meaningful. That night, after she had helped Miguel with his homework and tucked him into bed, Sarah sat at her kitchen table looking at the pile of bills and the piece of paper David had given her. She smiled as she thought about the young soldier, hoping he had made it back to his unit safely. Then she carefully folded the paper and put it in the drawer with other mementos she kept, not knowing that this simple piece of paper would soon become one of the most important things she had ever received. 3 weeks had passed since the stormy night when Sarah helped the stranded soldier, and life had somehow become even more challenging. The memory of that good deed felt like a distant bright spot in what had become an increasingly dark tunnel of financial pressure and emotional exhaustion. Sarah found herself working longer hours at both jobs, but the bills kept piling up faster than her ability to pay them. The electricity company had finally shut off her power after she missed 2 payment deadlines, despite her desperate phone calls explaining her situation. Sarah had begged them to give her 1 more week, promising she could cover the full amount plus late fees, but the customer service representative had been cold and unsympathetic. Now she and Miguel were using candles and flashlights in their small apartment, and Sarah had to throw away nearly everything in their refrigerator as it spoiled without power. Miguel, bless his heart, tried to make the best of their situation. He pretended they were camping indoors and told his mother that the candlelight made their dinner look fancy, like they were eating at a restaurant, but Sarah could see the worry in his 8-year-old eyes, the way he watched her carefully when she thought he wasn't looking. Children were much more perceptive than adults gave them credit for, and Miguel knew his mother was struggling, even though she tried her best to shield him from their problems. At the diner, Sarah's situation had become even more precarious. Mr. Pater, Peterson had noticed her increasing fatigue and distraction, and he had already given her 2 warnings about her performance. Last Tuesday, she had accidentally mixed up orders for 3 different tables because she was so tired from staying up late cleaning offices that her mind felt foggy all day. The customers had been understanding, but Peterson had pulled her aside and told her that if it happened again, he would have to let her go. The threat terrified Sarah, because she knew how difficult it would be to find another day job that worked around her night cleaning schedule. She had already looked into other opportunities in town, but most places wanted full-time availability, which was impossible when she needed the income from both positions just to survive. The cleaning company paid better per hour, but only offered work 3 nights a week, which wasn't enough to cover all their expenses. Sarah's car had started making a strange grinding noise that she couldn't afford to have checked by a mechanic. Every time she turned the key, she held her breath and prayed it would start because losing her transportation would mean losing both jobs immediately. She had been putting off getting her teeth cleaned for over a year, and a small cavity had grown into a painful problem that kept her awake at night. But dental work was a luxury she simply couldn't consider when choosing between medical care and keeping the lights on. The stress was taking a physical toll on Sarah's body and mind. She had lost weight because she often skipped meals to make sure Miguel had enough to eat, telling him she wasn't hungry when the truth was they couldn't afford food for both of them. Her hair was falling out in clumps from stress, and she had developed a nervous habit of picking at her fingernails until they bled. Sleep came in short, restless bursts filled with anxiety, dreams about bills and eviction notices. Miguel's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had started sending home notes expressing concern about his behavior at school. Apparently, he had been falling asleep during class and seemed distracted during lessons. Sarah knew it was because their apartment had become so stressful that Miguel wasn't getting proper rest, but she felt powerless to change their circumstances quickly enough to help her son. The guilt was overwhelming, especially when she saw other parents picking up their children in nice cars, wearing clothes that weren't worn thin from too many washings. One particularly difficult evening, Sarah sat in her dark kitchen after Miguel had gone to sleep, trying to figure out how to pay their rent, which was due in 5 days. She had exactly $37 in her checking account and another $18 in cash hidden in a coffee can, but their rent was $450. Even if she worked extra shifts at both jobs, there wasn't enough time before the due date to earn what they needed. The thought of asking for help made Sarah's stomach twist with embarrassment. She had always been proud of her independence, determined to handle her problems without becoming a burden on anyone else. But as she sat surrounded by past due notices and disconnection warnings, she began to realize that pride might be a luxury she could no longer afford. Miguel deserved better than this constant uncertainty and stress. Sarah remembered her conversation with David Washington, the young soldier she had helped during the storm. He had seemed so sincere when he gave her his contact information and told her not to hesitate to reach out if she ever needed anything. At the time, she had thought it was just politeness, the kind of thing people say when they're grateful but don't really expect to be taken seriously. But now, desperate and running out of options, she began to wonder if he had actually meant it. The idea of contacting David made Sarah feel uncomfortable in multiple ways. First, there was the embarrassment of admitting that her life had become so difficult that she needed help from someone she barely knew. Second, there was the fear that he might not even remember her or might feel imposed upon by her reaching out. And third, there was the practical concern that a young soldier probably didn't have much money himself and couldn't actually help even if he wanted to. But as Sarah looked at the eviction notice she had found taped to her door that afternoon, giving her 10 days to pay her outstanding rent or face removal proceedings, she realized she was running out of alternatives. She had already swallowed her pride enough to visit the local food bank and apply for government assistance, but those processes took weeks or months, and she needed help immediately. Late that night, after Miguel was asleep, Sarah found David's phone number in the drawer where she had carefully stored it. She stared at the piece of paper for nearly an hour, writing and rewriting a text message in her mind. How do you ask for help without sounding desperate? How do you explain that the person who helped you when you were stranded is now stranded herself, but in a much more complicated way than a broken-down car. Finally, Sarah typed a simple message. "Hi David, this is Sarah Martinez. I gave you a ride to Fort Hood during that storm a few weeks ago. I hope you're doing well. I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm facing some financial difficulties and wondered if you might know of any resources or opportunities that could help a single mother. I wouldn't ask unless I was really struggling. Thank you for your time." She read the message over and over, changing words and deleting sentences, trying to strike the right balance between honesty and dignity. After nearly 30 minutes of editing, she finally worked up the courage to hit send, then immediately regretted it. What if David thought she was trying to take advantage of his gratitude? What if he felt trapped into helping because of what she had done for him? Sarah barely slept that night, alternating between hope that David might have some useful advice and mortification that she had reached out at all. She kept checking her phone, but there was no response, which made her anxiety even worse. Maybe he was busy with military duties, or maybe he was trying to think of a polite way to tell her he couldn't help, or maybe he had deleted her message without reading it. The next morning, Sarah went through her usual routine of getting Miguel ready for school, but everything felt different knowing that she had put herself out there in such a vulnerable way. She tried to act normal, making Miguel's breakfast and helping him find his backpack, but her mind kept wandering to her phone and whether David would ever respond to her message. At work, Sarah found it even harder than usual to concentrate on taking orders and serving customers. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart raced, but it was always just spam messages or automated notifications, never the response she was hoping for. By lunchtime, she had convinced herself that reaching out to David had been a mistake, that she had misread his sincerity and put him in an awkward position. It wasn't until she was cleaning offices that night, scrubbing toilets in an empty corporate building while most of the world was at home with their families, that Sarah's phone finally rang with an unknown number. Her hands were wet from cleaning solution, and she almost dropped the phone as she hurried to answer it before it went to voicemail. "Mrs. Martinez?" The voice was familiar, warm and respectful, and Sarah immediately recognized it as belonging to David Washington. "Yes, this is Sarah," she replied, her heart pounding as she wondered what he was about to say. "I got your message, and I've been thinking about your situation all day," David said. And Sarah could hear genuine concern in his voice. "I want you to know that I'm honored you reached out to me, and I absolutely want to help in any way I can. I actually have some ideas that might make a real difference for you and your son." The relief in Sarah's chest was so strong it almost brought her to tears. Not only had David responded, but he sounded like he actually had concrete suggestions rather than just empty sympathies. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, things might start to get better. David Washington's voice carried a sense of urgency and genuine care that immediately put Sarah at ease. As she stood in the empty office building, mop in one hand and phone in the other, she listened carefully to what the young soldier had to say. "Mrs. Martinez, I want you to know that what you did for me that night meant more than you could possibly understand." David began, his voice steady and sincere. "I had been having the worst week of my life, and your kindness reminded me that there are still good people in this world who help others without expecting anything in return. I've been looking for a way to pay that forward ever since." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. She had helped David because it felt like the right thing to do, never imagining that such a simple gesture could have such a profound impact on someone else. "You don't owe me anything, David. I just did what anyone would do." "That's exactly why I want to help you," David replied. "Because you don't think what you did was special, but it absolutely was. And I think I might know someone who could make a real difference in your situation." David went on to explain that he had been thinking about Sarah's message all day and had finally decided to reach out to his commanding officer, Colonel James Mitchell. David had served under Colonel Mitchell for 2 years and knew him to be a man of exceptional character who genuinely cared about his soldiers and their families. More importantly, Colonel Mitchell had frequently spoken about his belief that military families should support each other, and that included civilians who went out of their way to help service members. "I told Colonel Mitchell about how you helped me that night, and about your current situation," David continued. "I hope that was okay. I didn't share any personal details, just that you're a single mother who's struggling, and that you have a brother who made the ultimate sacrifice for our country." Sarah's heart began to race. She wasn't sure where this conversation was heading, but something in David's tone suggested that Colonel Mitchell had been more than just politely interested in her story. "Mrs. Martinez, Colonel Mitchell would like to meet with you tomorrow if possible," David said. "He has some ideas about how he might be able to help, and he specifically asked me to tell you that this has nothing to do with charity and everything to do with honoring people who honor our military families. The next day, Sarah found herself sitting in a small conference room at Fort Hood, feeling completely out of place in her waitress uniform and worn shoes. She had managed to get coverage at the diner for a few hours, though Mr. Peterson had made it clear that these kinds of requests were becoming too frequent for his liking. Miguel was at school, unaware that his mother was potentially about to change both of their lives. Colonel Mitchell was not what Sarah had expected. Instead of the intimidating military stereotype she had imagined, he was a soft-spoken man in his early 50s with kind eyes and a warm handshake. He had invited David to join them, and seeing the young soldier again brought back memories of that stormy night that now felt like a lifetime ago.
Mrs. Hill.
Martinez, Private Washington has told me about your kindness to him, and I've also learned about your brother's service and sacrifice. Colonel Mitchell began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood the true cost of military service. I want to start by saying thank you, both for helping one of my soldiers and for the price your family has paid for our country's freedom. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had learned to be strong in front of strangers, especially authority figures who might see her emotions as weakness. Colonel Mitchell continued, David tells me you're facing some financial difficulties, and I want you to know that our military community takes care of people who take care of us. But before we talk about specific ways we might be able to help, I'd like to know more about your background and what kind of work you're interested in. Over the next hour, Sarah found herself opening up to Colonel Mitchell and David in a way she hadn't done with anyone in years. She told them about her jobs at the diner and cleaning company, about Miguel and his struggles in school due to their living situation, and about her fears for their future. She also shared her educational background, mentioning that she had completed 2 years of college before dropping out to care for her sick mother, and that she had always been good with computers and organization. Colonel Mitchell listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes. Sarah was surprised by how comfortable she felt talking to him, despite their obvious differences in background and social status. There was something about his genuine interest and lack of judgment that made her feel like a person worthy of respect rather than an object of pity. Mrs. Martinez, I think we might have a solution that could work well for everyone involved, Colonel Mitchell said after Sarah had finished sharing her story. We have a civilian position opening up in our administrative department. It's a full-time job with excellent benefits, including health insurance and educational assistance. The work involves managing schedules, coordinating communications, and handling various organizational tasks for our personnel department.
Sarah's heart began to pound.
A full-time job with benefits sounded almost too good to be true, especially one that might actually use some of her skills and interests. The position requires someone who is detail-oriented, reliable, and good with people, Colonel Mitchell continued. Based on what David has told me about you and what I've observed in our conversation today, I think you might be exactly what we're looking for. The starting salary is $42,000 a year, which I believe would be significantly more than what you're currently earning from your 2 part-time jobs. Sarah felt dizzy. $42,000 a year was more money than she had ever imagined making. It would mean she could quit both of her current jobs and actually have time to spend with Miguel. It would mean health insurance and dental care and the ability to pay their bills without constant panic. There are a few requirements, Colonel Mitchell explained. You would need to pass a background check, which I don't anticipate being a problem. You would also need to complete some basic computer training, though we provide that as part of your orientation. And you would need to be available to work regular business hours, Monday through Friday. I can do all of that, Sarah said quickly, perhaps too quickly. She was trying not to sound desperate, but the opportunity seemed so perfect that she was afraid it might disappear if she didn't express her interest immediately. Colonel Mitchell smiled. I thought you might be interested. David also mentioned that you have a young son, and I want you to know that our base has an excellent after-school program for military families and civilian employees. It's affordable, safe, and includes homework help and recreational activities. Miguel would be welcome there. Sarah felt like she might start crying right there in the conference room. The idea that Miguel could have a safe, structured place to go after school with activities and support was almost as appealing as the job itself. She thought about all the nights she had worried about him being alone or in substandard care while she worked multiple jobs. When would you need me to start? Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Well, there are some administrative processes we need to complete first, Colonel Mitchell replied. The background check usually takes about 2 weeks. And then we would need to schedule your computer training. If everything goes smoothly, I would estimate you could start in about a month. A month felt both incredibly fast and impossibly long. Fast because Sarah could hardly believe this opportunity had materialized so quickly, and long because she wasn't sure how they would survive another month in their current situation. David seemed to understand her concern.
Mrs. Martinez, I know a month might seem like a long time when you're struggling with immediate expenses.
Colonel Mitchell and I have discussed this, and we have some ideas about how to help bridge that gap. Colonel Mitchell nodded. Our base has an emergency assistance fund for situations exactly like this. It's designed to help military families and civilians who support our community get through temporary financial hardships. We would be able to provide some immediate assistance with your rent and utilities while we process your employment paperwork. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the generosity and thoughtfulness these two men were showing her. She had walked into this meeting hoping for advice or perhaps information about resources, never dreaming that she might walk out with a complete solution to her problems.
I don't know what to say,
Sarah managed, her voice thick with emotion. This is more than I ever dared to hope for. You don't need to say anything except yes, Colonel Mitchell replied with a warm smile. David told me about your character, and this conversation has confirmed everything he said. We would be lucky to have you as part of our team. As Sarah drove home from Fort Hood that afternoon, she felt like she was floating. For the first time in years, she had hope for the future, real hope, based on concrete opportunities rather than just wishful thinking. She couldn't wait to tell Miguel that their struggles were finally going to come to an end, that soon they would have a stable life with steady income and proper benefits. That evening, as she tucked Miguel into bed in their still dark apartment, Sarah whispered to her son that things were going to get better very soon. Miguel smiled sleepily and told her he believed her, and Sarah realized that maybe, just maybe, believing in good things was about to become a luxury they could finally afford. The weeks that followed Sarah's meeting with Colonel Mitchell felt like a whirlwind of positive changes that she could hardly believe were real. The Emergency Assistance Fund had covered their overdue rent and utility bills, and for the first time in months, Sarah came home to an apartment with electricity, heat, and the comforting hum of a working refrigerator. Miguel's face had lit up like Christmas morning when the lights came back on, and he had spent an entire evening just flipping switches and marveling at the simple miracle of illumination. Sarah's background check had cleared without any problems, just as Colonel Mitchell had predicted. The process had been thorough but straightforward, and the investigator who interviewed her had been professional and respectful. She learned that David Washington had provided a glowing character reference, describing in detail how she had stopped to help him during the storm and refused to accept any payment for her kindness. Reading his written statement had brought tears to Sarah's eyes and reminded her once again how a simple act of compassion had set in motion a series of events that were transforming her life. The computer training sessions at Fort Hood had been both challenging and exciting. Sarah discovered that she had a natural aptitude for the administrative software and database management systems used by the military. The instructor, a patient woman named Sergeant Lisa Chen, had praised Sarah's quick learning and attention to detail. Sarah found herself genuinely enjoying the work, something she hadn't experienced in years of serving tables and scrubbing floors. There was satisfaction in organizing information, coordinating schedules, and solving the small puzzles that came with managing complex administrative tasks. During her training period, Sarah had also been introduced to her future colleagues in the personnel department. The team was a diverse mix of military personnel and civilians who welcomed her warmly and seemed genuinely excited to have her join them. Her supervisor, Captain Maria Rodriguez, was a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for fairness and efficiency. Captain Rodriguez had taken the time to personally walk Sarah through her future responsibilities and had expressed confidence that Sarah would be an excellent addition to their team. The after-school program for Miguel had exceeded all of Sarah's expectations. The facility was clean, safe, and staffed by trained professionals who genuinely cared about the children in their care. Miguel had initially been nervous about the change, but within a week he was excitedly telling Sarah about his new friends and the activities they did each day. The program included homework help, recreational activities, arts and crafts, and even educational field trips. For the first time in his young life, Miguel was experiencing the kind of structured, enriching after-school environment that Sarah had always wanted to provide, but couldn't afford. On Sarah's first official day of work, she arrived at Fort Hood 30 minutes early, wearing a new outfit she had carefully selected from a discount store. She had spent hours the night before preparing, laying out her clothes, packing a lunch, and going over her training materials one more time. The nervousness she felt was different from the anxiety she had grown accustomed to over the past few years. This was the excitement of new opportunities rather than the fear of impending disaster. Colonel Mitchell had personally welcomed Sarah on her first day, stopping by her desk to check how she was settling in, and to remind her that his door was always open if she had questions or concerns. David Washington had also visited during his lunch break, grinning widely as he saw Sarah in her new work environment. The young soldier told her how proud he was to see her thriving, and reminded her that she had earned every bit of good fortune that was coming her way. Sarah's job responsibilities turned out to be even more interesting and varied than she had expected. She was responsible for coordinating training schedules for incoming personnel, managing communication between different departments, maintaining records and databases, and serving as a liaison between military families and various support services. The work required organization, attention to detail, and interpersonal skills, all areas where Sarah discovered she had natural talent. One of the most rewarding aspects of her new position was helping other military families navigate the various resources and programs available to them. Sarah found herself serving as an unofficial counselor and advocate for spouses who were struggling with deployments, families dealing with relocations, and individuals who needed help accessing educational or financial assistance programs. Her own experience with financial hardship gave her a unique empathy and understanding that made her exceptionally good at this aspect of her job. Within her first month at work, Sarah had already earned praise from multiple supervisors and colleagues for her efficiency, professionalism, and positive attitude. Captain Rodriguez had specifically mentioned Sarah's exceptional ability to handle difficult situations with grace and to make people feel heard and valued. The skills Sarah had developed during years of working in customer service, combined with her natural compassion and reliability, made her an invaluable member of the team. The financial transformation in Sarah and Miguel's life was dramatic and immediate. With her new salary, Sarah was able to not only pay all their bills on time, but actually start saving money for the first time in years. She opened a savings account for Miguel's future education and began contributing to a retirement plan offered through her new job. The health insurance benefits meant that Sarah could finally address her dental problems and schedule regular checkups for both herself and Miguel. They moved out of their cramped, run-down apartment into a larger, safer place in a better neighborhood. The new apartment had 2 bedrooms, which meant Miguel could have his own space for the first time in his life. Sarah decorated it carefully with furniture that wasn't second-hand and appliances that actually worked properly. Miguel's room was filled with books, art supplies, and educational games that Sarah could now afford to buy without guilt or financial stress. The impact on Miguel's academic performance was immediate and dramatic. With a stable home environment, proper nutrition, adequate sleep, and the support of the after-school program, his grades improved significantly. His teacher, Mrs. Ellis Rodriguez, had specifically commented on the positive changes she was seeing in Miguel's behavior, attitude, and academic engagement. Sarah attended parent-teacher conferences with pride instead of embarrassment, knowing that she was finally able to provide her son with the support and resources he needed to succeed. Sarah also began taking advantage of the educational assistance benefits offered through her job. She enrolled in night classes to complete her college degree, something she had thought would be forever out of reach. The tuition assistance program covered most of the costs, and her stable work schedule made it possible to attend classes without sacrificing time with Miguel or jeopardizing their financial security. Sarah chose to study business administration with a focus on non-profit management, inspired by her experiences and interested in eventually helping other families facing similar challenges. The emotional and psychological changes in Sarah's life were perhaps even more significant than the financial ones. The constant stress and anxiety that had been her daily companions for years began to fade away, replaced by confidence, optimism, and a sense of purpose. She stood straighter, smiled more often, and began to see herself as someone with value and potential, rather than just a survivor struggling to get by. Sarah's relationship with Miguel also transformed as the pressures of poverty no longer dominated their daily lives. Instead of coming home exhausted and stressed from multiple jobs, Sarah now had time and energy to help with homework, play games, and simply enjoy being a mother. They established new traditions, like Saturday morning pancake breakfasts and Sunday afternoon trips to the park or library. Miguel began opening up more about his thoughts and feelings, and Sarah realized how much their previous stress had affected his emotional development. One evening, about 2 months into her new job, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Colonel Mitchell. He asked if she would be interested in taking on additional responsibilities that would involve helping to develop and implement new family support programs on the base. The assignment would come with a salary increase and the opportunity to really make a difference in the lives of military families who were facing challenges similar to what she had experienced. Sarah accepted the opportunity immediately, excited by the chance to use her experiences to help others and to continue growing professionally. She realized that her journey from desperation to stability had given her insights and skills that could be valuable in helping other families navigate difficult times. The work would involve developing resource guides, coordinating support services, and serving as an advocate for families in need. As Sarah hung up the phone after accepting the new responsibilities, she looked around her comfortable apartment and marveled at how completely her life had changed. Just a few months ago, she had been struggling to keep the electricity on and wondering how she would feed her son. Now she was being trusted with important work that could impact hundreds of families. She was pursuing a college degree, and she was providing Miguel with opportunities she had only dreamed of giving him. That night, as she tucked Miguel into his own bed in his own room, Sarah reflected on the incredible chain of events that had led them to this moment. It had all started with a simple decision to help a stranded soldier on a rainy night, and that act of kindness had somehow opened doors she never knew existed. She thought about David Washington and Colonel Mitchell, and how their willingness to invest in her had transformed not just her own life, but Miguel's future as well. 1 year after that life-changing stormy night, Sarah Martinez stood before a room full of military families at Fort Hood's annual Community Appreciation Dinner, preparing to share her story as the keynote speaker. She wore a professional dress that she had bought with her own money, not from necessity but from choice, and her confidence radiated from years of stability and personal growth. Miguel sat in the front row, now 9-year-old and thriving in every way that mattered, his proud smile giving Sarah strength as she prepared to speak. The transformation in Sarah's life over the past year had been nothing short of remarkable. Her work developing family support programs had gained recognition throughout the military community, and she had been promoted twice, each time with increased responsibilities and salary. She had completed her bachelor's degree with honors, taking advantage of every educational opportunity her job provided, and was now considering pursuing a master's degree in social work or non-profit administration. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah had discovered her true calling in helping other families navigate the challenges that she had once faced herself. The family support programs she had developed were being implemented at military bases across the country, providing resources and assistance to thousands of families who were struggling with financial hardship, deployment stress, and the unique challenges of military life. The program Sarah was most proud of was called Battle Buddies for Families, a system that connected struggling military families with volunteers who provided practical support, mentorship, and advocacy. The program was built on the same principle that had changed Sarah's life: the idea that small acts of kindness from one person could create transformative ripple effects in another person's world. Through this program, Sarah had helped dozens of families find stable employment, access educational opportunities, secure emergency financial assistance, and connect with resources they didn't know existed. Each success story reminded Sarah of her own journey and reinforced her belief that everyone deserved a chance to build a better life for themselves and their children. David Washington, now promoted to sergeant, had become one of Sarah's closest friends and most enthusiastic supporters. He regularly volunteered with the family support programs and had personally helped several struggling families find their footing. David often told people that helping Sarah had taught him the true meaning of military service, which wasn't just about protecting the country, but about protecting the people who make up the fabric of American communities. Colonel Mitchell had become something of a father figure to Sarah, mentoring her professional development and encouraging her to pursue leadership opportunities within the military community. He had nominated Sarah for several awards recognizing her contributions to family support services and had written recommendation letters for her graduate school applications. Under his guidance, Sarah had developed the confidence to see herself as a leader and change-maker, rather than just someone who had been lucky enough to receive help. Miguel's transformation had been equally dramatic. Now, in 4th grade, he was an honor roll student who participated in soccer, chess club, and the school's Gifted and Talented program. The stability and support he had gained through their changed circumstances had allowed his natural intelligence and creativity to flourish. He had developed strong friendships, gained confidence in his abilities, and began talking about his dreams for the future, including possibly following his Uncle Carlos's footsteps into military service or becoming a teacher like his favorite instructor at the after-school program. The apartment Sarah and Miguel now called home bore no resemblance to the dark, cramped space where they had struggled just over a year ago. Their 2-bedroom apartment in a safe, family-friendly complex was filled with books, artwork, and the comfortable furniture of a family that no longer had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. Sarah had even been able to save enough money to take Miguel on a real vacation for the first time in his life, a trip to visit the Grand Canyon that had filled them both with wonder and gratitude. Sarah's relationship with money had fundamentally changed as well. Instead of the constant anxiety and desperation she had once felt, she now approached financial decisions with confidence and planning. She had established an emergency fund, contributed regularly to Miguel's college savings account, and even begun investing in her retirement. More importantly, she had learned the joy of being able to help others financially regularly contributing to the base's emergency assistance fund that had once helped her family in their time of need. The ripple effects of Sarah's transformation extended far beyond her immediate family. Her parents, who lived several states away and had worried constantly about Sarah and Miguel's well-being, were now able to enjoy visits from their daughter and grandson without the shadow of financial stress hanging over every conversation. Sarah's relationship with her extended family had improved dramatically once she was no longer in constant crisis mode, and Miguel was finally able to develop meaningful connections with his grandparents and cousins. Sarah had also become a mentor and inspiration to other single mothers in her community, both within and outside the military. She regularly spoke at workshops and support groups, sharing her story and practical advice about accessing resources, building professional skills, and maintaining hope during difficult times. Her message was always the same, that accepting help when you need it isn't a sign of weakness, and that one person's kindness can literally change the trajectory of another person's life. The evening of the Community Appreciation Dinner, Sarah's speech focused on the interconnectedness of military and civilian communities and the importance of supporting each other through both challenges and successes. She spoke about her brother Carlos and how his sacrifice had taught her family the value of service to others. She talked about David Washington's character and generosity, and how his willingness to share her story with Colonel Mitchell had opened doors she never could have imagined. But most importantly, Sarah spoke about the lesson she had learned that stormy night when she decided to stop and help a stranded soldier. That we never know how our actions might impact someone else's life, and that the smallest gestures of kindness often have the most profound consequences. When I stopped to pick up Sergeant Washington that night, I thought I was just giving someone a ride, Sarah told the audience, her voice strong and clear. I had no idea that I was actually saving my own life and my son's future. I learnt that night that kindness is never wasted, even when we can't see its immediate impact. Every time we choose to help someone else, we're investing in a future that might be completely different from what we can imagine. After her speech, Sarah was approached by dozens of people who wanted to share their own stories of struggle and recovery, of kindness received and kindness given. A young single mother told Sarah that hearing her story had given her hope that her current financial struggles weren't permanent. An older veteran thanked Sarah for reminding him why his service had mattered. A teenage dependent told Sarah that her speech had inspired him to look for ways to help others in his school and community. David Washington, now accompanied by his new wife, whom he had met through one of the base's community programs, told Sarah that watching her transformation had been one of the most rewarding experiences of his military career. Colonel Mitchell, preparing for his upcoming retirement, told Sarah that her success represented everything he had hoped to accomplish during his time in service, creating opportunities for good people to thrive and contribute to their communities. As the evening wound down and families began heading home, Sarah and Miguel walked slowly across the base toward their car, both of them reflecting on how much their lives had changed since that stormy November night. Miguel, who had heard his mother's speech and understood more of their story than ever before, took Sarah's hand and told her how proud he was to be her son. "Mom," Miguel said as they reached their car, "do you think Uncle Carlos would be proud of what we've done?" Sarah smiled, thinking of her brother who had given his life in service to his country and who had inspired her to help a young soldier on a rainy night. "I think he would be very proud," she replied. "Not just of what we've accomplished, but of how we've used our experiences to help other people." As they drove home through the quiet Texas evening, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. From desperation to stability, from isolation to community, from surviving to thriving, their transformation had been complete and profound. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah had learned that her story wasn't really about what had been done for her, but about what she was now able to do for others. The next morning, Sarah would return to work, where she would continue developing programs to help military families, pursue her graduate studies, and raise her son in an environment of opportunity and hope. David would continue his military service, inspired by the knowledge that his actions had created lasting positive change in the world. Colonel Mitchell would retire knowing that his investment in one struggling family had multiplied into assistance for hundreds of others. And somewhere, on roads and in communities across the country, other people would face moments of choice. Whether to stop and help a stranger, whether to reach out when they needed assistance, whether to believe that kindness matters even when its impact isn't immediately visible. Sarah's story had become proof that these choices matter enormously, that compassion creates connections that can transform lives in ways we never expect, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply decide to help each other, one small act of kindness at a time. The knock that had changed everything had turned out to be the sound of opportunity, delivered through the hands of people who understood that taking care of each other is what makes communities strong and lives meaningful. And in the years to come, as Sarah continued to grow in her career and Miguel pursued his own dreams, they would never forget that their entire future had been built on the foundation of one simple decision: to stop in the rain and offer help to someone who needed it.